Hey there, my name is Susan Collins and I'm very pleased to be here on the network. And you may have seen my other series on dowsing. So this is a continuation of that and an application of dowsing. In this case, we're looking at soul retrieval with dowsing. What is dowsing? Just to remind you, we're using an object, in this case a pendulum, and the movements of the object give us an indication of a yes, a no, or maybe. So I've spent the last 20 years fiddling around with pendulums and L rods and bobbers, fiddling around, but actually training my mind-body system to accurately and safely access intuitive information. One of the things I've done is to develop a dowsing protocol, and I do talk about that in the other series, Dowsing Protocol. So have a look at that, and for those of you who'd like, I can send you a free copy of the dowsing protocol if you send me an email, susan@dowser.ca. I'll send you a free copy of the dowsing protocol, just a two-page PDF, and that will help you dowse safely and accurately. So I got into dowsing because I had a chronic illness. My hands were crippled for 23 years, tried all the meds, and really nothing worked. It wasn't until I started accessing my own intuition and coming into resonance with beneficial energy, divine energy, that I was able to recover my health. So, soul retrieval, what is the soul? Like we have been asking that for millennia. As long as we have been humans on the planet, we've asked, is there God? Is there a soul? Why are we here? What are we doing? So we have many of us who are sensitive, and if you're watching this, you're probably one of those sensitive people. Many of us who are sensitive do have experiences that we cannot explain in any other way. I would like to show you some photographs of what is the soul, what is it that persists. Now, as a reminder, if you've had a chance to watch the Resonance movie also on this network, I spoke extensively in that movie about the orb phenomena. Orbs are those fluffy little balls of light that many of us take pictures of. So what is an orb? An orb is an energy phenomena. It's something that we can't explain with normal science unless we start talking about quantum physics. One of the things I say with the orbs is that perhaps we are being prepared. Now, in the Resonance movie, we were focusing on alien interaction, off-planet consciousness, and we were focusing on that. And I sometimes say that having the orb phenomena, it gives us a chance to get used to seeing things that are not of our world. So there are three states of matter with the orb energy. One is the ball, and you're probably familiar with that. It's got a membrane around it and looks like cotton candy, cotton wool on the inside. The next state of the orb energy is plasma. So that it's as if that orb breaks out and plasma or something comes out and it starts to form into things. Just before we move into that, the third state of matter for the orb energy is an orb carrier, and that is like the transport. You know, we think, we don't know, but it's as if that's a transport mechanism for orb energy. But let's go back to that plasma state of energy as it breaks out of the orb, and one would ask, why is it changing state? Again, it goes back to our frequencies, our resonance, our thought forms, our heart action, that as we interact with interdimensional energy, with the orb energy, we can trigger that, or sometimes it might trigger us, but it breaks into a plasma form. So I'd like to show you a photograph that was sent to me, taken in the winter on a horse farm. And you'll notice down in the bottom right corner, there's a muzzle. You can see the head of a horse facing into the left. But you'll also notice that swirling plasma, swirling cloud. And if you look at that, looks pretty much like the head of a horse. So is that coincidence? Is that just, is the breath of the photographer in that particular moment created a picture of a horse? That's hard to say. But for me, I would say that the spirit energy of the horse is in that photograph. Another photograph I'd like to show you was also sent to me, and I do have permission to share these photographs. I didn't take them, but I have permission. So the next photograph to show you is of some people on a school bus, and I invite you to count the number of people, number of faces that you can see in the school bus. When the person sent it to me, I said, well, I see 3 children and 2 women. And she had sent it to me because she thought it was the ghost of her grandmother appearing in the image. And I said, well, I see the 2 women and the 3 kids. What are we looking at? And she said there was only one adult human on the bus. The image of the grandmother is completely formed from plasma. And you can see that swirly energy again. This woman also sent me some photographs of her dead grandmother from different stages of her life, and the form that manifested was of the grandmother probably in her 70s, you know, still kind of young, and why did she show up there? If you look at the children, they're very excited about the school bus, and there's, I think, an emotional context that perhaps in this case is bringing in the spirit, or could we say the soul? In any case, we can say the consciousness appears to have shown up. We might also say, well, maybe the child formed that, but it's, you know, we don't know for sure. But I can tell you that by using dowsing and using protocols, that we can interact with this consciousness, these levels of consciousness, and start to figure things out. Most of us, I think, have had the experience when a loved one passes that we sense their presence, perhaps we see them at the end of our bed. So I simply would like to state that I do believe the soul, the consciousness persists after we leave the body. So one of the things I do as a professional dowser is ghost busting. So I'm often called into places where the consciousness of the deceased is still persisting. And as I interact with that consciousness, and I talk to the ghosts, I just call it extra consciousness, but we often use the word ghost. When I speak to the ghost, I say, I see you there, can I help you? And they often say yes, and sometimes it's up to me to be the one to tell them that they've left their body. Because sometimes the spirit, the soul, the ghost, whatever you want to call it, they're kind of stuck in between. They haven't passed on to the next stage, and they're not attached to they're not so visible in our earth plane. And sometimes I'm the one that has to say, I'm sorry to tell you, I'm happy to tell you that you're no longer in your body. And people are often quite confused. I think most of us, when we die, we pass on to the next stage. But sometimes we persist for various reasons, and we can talk about that on another time. So sometimes we experienced our loved ones as an image or a feeling or a sensation, or perhaps we might have a dream. So I think we can safely say that the soul does persist after we leave our bodies. Now that brings us to another aspect of this, because it seems to me, and there's much research to back this up, that we are here in these bodies, but that we have previously existed in other bodies, and we call this reincarnation, obviously. So if we are reincarnated into this form in this time, which is a very exciting time to be alive, but it could be that parts of our previous consciousness, parts of our previous soul has been left behind in a past life. So not just a past life, different body, but sometimes past life, this body. And that's perhaps an easier concept to consider, that in childhood, I think it's safe to say that when there is a moment of trauma, and often it's in childhood, and it could be an accident, it could be abuse, it could be something traumatic that is happening, and in that moment, and I think we've all been there, there's that kind of holding of the breath, and in that holding of the breath, it's as if the soul is departing as well. I've also heard, I can't tell you because I'm still in this body, that we don't, I've been told this, that as we die we don't feel pain because in that moment the soul departs. So it's, thank God we don't experience a violent death, for example. But that mechanism that safeguards us by withdrawing part of our soul consciousness, we have to work sometimes to bring that back. And that's what I'd like to do with dowsing. And I'd like to share with you, A, that it's possible, B, that it's necessary. It's necessary to bring all your soul parts back. Now, why is that? Besides being a happier person, I've come to believe that when I was trained in soul retrieval, that the concept was we go into the parts of the soul are hiding in a cave, and we go into the cave and bring them back out, which that's a good working hypothesis, if you will. But I was teaching a soul retrieval class one day, and one of the students said, well, where is the soul hiding? And I thought about that, and I thought about addictions, and I thought about all the things we experience as humans. And it occurred to me that where the soul fragments are hiding is back in our body. And this can explain some of the addictive behaviors that we have. For example, overeating. You know, I think it's common knowledge that if women have been sexually abused, we might tend to do things that make our bodies less attractive, or that we find comfort. We pack on fat, A, so that we're not sexually attractive, and B, there's that sense of being hugged from the inside. That's a whole other thing. But when eating to feel so full is like an internal hug. So one of the self-help things you can do just at any time is hug yourself, and that can, you may not need to overeat or do any of the other addictive behaviors. But that's another one. That's another issue. Right now I'd like to look back again at how to retrieve the hidden soul parts that may be causing addictive behaviors, such as hoarding, such as drinking, such as overeating, such as the obsessive compulsive disorders that so many of us have, and especially with the young children too. As an aside here, the kids coming in now are extremely sensitive, and in my generation we certainly weren't able to ever talk about other consciousness. And I think it's really a duty we have now, those of us who are able to, and to be comfortable doing it, when we talk to these young children and they say, oh, I'm experiencing something, I'm seeing something, that instead of us saying, oh, there's nothing there, don't be silly, which is what I was told, they go, well, tell me about it. What does that being look like? What are they doing? And what are they saying? And carry on like that. Carry on, respect the child as if it's a normal conversation. And in addition, as we age and are dying, and many of us will experience the presence of our relatives, our loved ones will come and stand in the corner of the room. And as your loved one is passing and they say, oh, I see, you know, I see him there, he's standing there, he's looking at me. Say, oh, well, you know, how is he? And tell me about him. And treat it like a normal thing, because the soul persists. And it is, it's very important for us to be healthy humans, to restore as much as we can our soul parts. Okay, so next topic here is the amygdala hijack, and what is that? So if you look at energy psychology today and brain function, we know that there's the amygdala, which are two pieces in the brain where emotionally traumatic memories are stored in the amygdala. The aspect of that is that we can't consciously remember the information stored in the amygdala. So talk therapy doesn't really get it out. We can't talk about, oh yeah, when I was 3, you know, this thing happened, because it's stored deep in the amygdala and it doesn't come out with talking. So that is where dowsing is such a perfect tool to access the subconscious mind. So that's something that we do very often with dowsing. And I do this. It's not a party game. It's not something you do without being ready to really have a full-on experience. And again, if you would like a protocol to dowse safely, send me that request, susan@dowser.ca. And I also have a handout, Soul Retrieval with Dowsing, which I'll send you as well. So the protocol Soul Retrieval in the subject line. So I've broken everything out into checklists, because that seems to be, as Westerners, you know, we work well with lists, and our brains work well with lists, and it gives us a way not to get emotionally triggered by some of these things. For example, if you're working with somebody and you say, oh, I see you have 6 non-beneficial souls attached to you, people will just freak out. We don't want to have an emotional trigger, because that just goes back into the amygdala and we can't get it out. So having a list and checking through it with this very simple tool, profound yet simple tool, it keeps us from being emotionally taken down. Because once we're activated emotionally, it's very hard to get any real work done. So we have compassionate detachment. And we have compassionate detachment for ourselves, not just for the people that we're working with. We compassionately, we care, but we're detached. We don't take on their problems. And especially as our children get older as well, around 13, 14, as our kids are leaving us, we so much want to help them, to continue to help them. But we have to detach from that, because as parents, when we cling on to our children, we're creating non-beneficial psychic cords on them as well. So we've talked about non-beneficial psychic cords, I think, in other series, and we can do that again sometime. But right now I'd like just to focus on how the heck do I get my soul parts back? So let's really get down to soul retrieval with dowsing. And it can be a kind of a scary thing, and I am going to do a case study with you, a real case study with a real client at this time. I'm not going to give their name. It's a man. That's all I'm going to say. But I'm going to use my checklist in my head and go through aspects of a soul retrieval, of finding the hidden soul. And once we find those hidden parts, what we seek to do is repair them. So there can be soul damage, and those hidden parts can be very almost childlike, if you will, because if something happened in your childhood when you were 3 years old, for example, when you bring that part of your soul back, that's still a little kind of 3-year-old. So one of the things I always say is, it's okay to come back. I'm all grown up now. I'll look after you. So again, it's self-care. We have to be so gentle with ourselves, as if we were our own child, and we love ourselves as much as we would love our own child, and we respect ourselves. That's huge. Okay, so I've got the pendulum going, and I might be sighing, doing different things, but I've got a real client in mind. So clockwise here is my yes, back and forth is neutral, and counterclockwise is my no. So I'm going to start off by saying, is it appropriate for me at this time, for the purposes of this interview, to do a soul retrieval case study to demonstrate the techniques so that people can benefit on their own? I'm getting a yes on that. Okay, so I'm thinking of somebody. May I use that person already? Okay, the first thing, and I already suspect, right? So I have a paper checklist, but I'm going straight into it here. So I always say, for the best and highest good. And I encourage people to access the divine source, whatever that is to you. So if you say God, Creator, divine source, Jesus, whatever your most profound connection to the divine is, please use that. We don't intend to change anybody's belief system, but go into your own place. It is the place of unconditional love. So I have to close my eyes sometimes. So we go into the altered states here. But I must say, I do not channel information. I never lose my own consciousness. I think it's extremely important to maintain the sovereign being. We access other dimensional information, aliens, past lives, future lives, ghosts. We can communicate them, but we never lose our own consciousness. So I may close my eyes, but it's only to be less of a distraction. So I'm thinking of my client. My sigh is a change in brainwave frequency. We're going through different brainwave frequencies. And that sigh, you may find when you're dowsing that you get very tired at the beginning. This is as you change your brainwave frequency, you're going into a theta state, which is usually just before you go to sleep. So at the beginning, it's just hard to stay awake when you're doing this. But my sigh is me changing my brainwave state already. Okay, so bringing my client to my focus, forgot to mention the plus minus chart. All right, so plus minus chart, well, you pretend it's my hand, neutral in the beginning, plus up to plus 100, minus 100. And I have a proper chart, but I'll just use my hand. And when it's going along the center, it's neutral, and when it's to the right, it's positive. So I can say, the reason I'm telling you this, I'm using my hand right now, please indicate the percentage my client's original soul is in his body. And I don't know, I have a proper chart someplace, but you can see it's not a big amount. It's about, is it about 20%? So only about 20% of the original soul is in the body. And I often say on average, is more of it there other times? No. Is the rest of his soul hiding? No. Has the rest, is some of his soul hiding? You see, this is the 20 questions that we do. Is all of it hiding? No. Is some of it hiding? Yes. Is some of it damaged? Yes. Is all of it damaged? No. Has some, between the original, oh, here's, it occurs to me as we go, are there other soul parts that are not original to him in his body on average? I get a big yes. Other soul parts have taken up residence. I had a client once where the mother said to me, she said, it's as if my daughter's possessed. And I went back and I checked, and the original soul meant for that little baby had withdrawn from the body before it was even born. So I'd like to tell you a story about a client of mine in the early days where the mother said to me, and the girl was about 11, she said, it's as if my daughter's possessed. So when I went in there and I checked with my dowsing, I found that the original soul meant for that little baby had withdrawn from the body before the baby was even born. And as the original soul withdrew, other random souls came in, which is really not what the divine plan was meant to be about. So thinking back now again onto our case study, where I'm looking at my client, current client, and I'm asking what percentage of the original soul meant for the body is present, and I'm getting around 20%, and then what percentage is damaged, I'm getting around 10%, and I ask what percentage of other soul not intended for that body is present, and I'm getting about 60%. It doesn't add up to 100, it doesn't matter. The main thing to notice here is that there are other souls resident in the human that were not intended to be there. And perhaps that's opportunistic. Perhaps that happened, and I don't know this, perhaps it happened because when the man withdrew the original soul parts, he may not have been able to function. He's a man with many responsibilities, and just to check out, you'd be catatonic. So it could have been meant to be a helpful thing. Oh, let's go buddy up with this guy. I don't know. But I think, let's ask, is it appropriate for non-original soul parts to be associated with this man? I get a no. So we have found a fairly profound state that can be corrected. So here's what we do. And there are more questions, there are more checklists, it's a longer process. But for the purposes of our conversation here today, this will give you an example of how to remove the non-original soul parts and bring back, hopefully, beneficial parts. Alrighty, so we have our pendulum, as we remember, clockwise for me is yes, and back and forth is neutral, and counterclockwise is no. Alrighty. So I use the dowsing protocol on this. So I'm gonna say, for the purposes of my client's well-being and for the purposes of people having a demonstration of removing non-beneficial energy, non-beneficial soul parts, is it appropriate for me to go forward with this? I'm getting a neutral. So it's my choice. And that is one thing to remember. We're here as humans making choices. So we can choose many things. We can choose to stay disconnected and addicted, and we can choose all kinds of things. But in this case, I'm going to choose to go ahead with this little demonstration. Alrighty. And I talk to spirit like buddy and all this stuff, right? I think we have to have, when our hearts are light, we have more power. We are not subject to fear or anger or negative emotions. It's just like, hey, buddy, how you doing over there? So I'm going to start with that. Are the other soul parts associated with my client willing to communicate? I get a no. And I find it's very typical that when an energy does not want to communicate with me, it's basically hiding. And why would it be hiding? Because it doesn't want to leave, right? So we say, okay, are there any, let's see if the original soul, okay, at this point I address the original soul of my client. Are you willing to communicate? I get a yes. And now here's where the client has to choose. Would you like to have all aspects of your original soul restored to your body? I get a no. The client doesn't want to do that. So instead of throwing up her hands, saying, oh no, you say, okay, are you willing to communicate about that? Are you willing to tell us why? I get a yes. So there's my sigh. I'm changing brainwave state in there. Dear client, are you afraid you won't be able to function without these other consciousness, other soul parts? I get a yes on that. So it's, that's a human thing, right? We are just human. We make mistakes. He's been living a long time handling his responsibilities by kind of checking it out and saying, okay, you guys do it. So it takes some courage to go forward with this. And we need the client's permission. If we don't have the client's permission, and I'm doing it etherically here, if we don't have the client's permission to do the energy work, it is like black magic. It is a trespass, and we do not do that. So I'm going to address my client again. If I could tell you, now I'm making a deal. I do a lot of trickster stuff here, but only for the good. To the client, if I could tell you that you would be able to handle your responsibilities just with your own soul, would you be willing to bring your soul parts back? And he still says no. Obviously, this is a current client, and the reason I brought you a current client and not a checklist and say, here it is, it works every time. The energy work is extremely complicated, and there is often not just one quick fix for things. If we have problems and feelings and emotions and aspects of ourselves that have been out of balance for a long time, it can take a lot of self-care and a lot of work to bring ourselves back into order. And I don't want you to have to watch for the next week while we sort this fellow out, but I'm going to talk to him one more time. And I say, dear client, thank you for communicating. Would you be willing to communicate with me later and we can discuss this further? I get a yes on that. I get a yes on that. So I have my client, my human client, has said, yes, we'll talk about it later. So now we already know that this is whole chunk of non-beneficial, and I'm calling it non-beneficial because it's not supposed to be there. We check that. There's the other soul parts not meant for the body. And so I put them on notice, and I say buddies, because I'm not threatening them, right? That's not what I do. I don't threaten. But I say, hey buddies, you know you are not meant to be associated with my client, and I'm thinking about my client. And I will be coming back later to sort you out. And we will be restoring 100% of the original soul back into the client. And I've got a strong action on that. So you've probably got my veiled threat, right? It was very subtle. So I say to these other soul parts, will you be there when I come back? No. So things don't always leave right in that moment. Sometimes it leaves in that moment. But what we've done here is set up a procedure, a protocol. We've identified the problem. The original soul part is hardly there. There's damaged soul parts. There have been non-original soul parts. And I've got my client to agree, yes, he and I are going to work on this later. And most importantly, the other soul parts have been identified. I see you there. I'm coming back. Will you be here? No, they won't. So we've set up, this is called sending your medicine ahead. So we try to do everything gently. We integrate the energies to the best of our ability at a rate that we can assimilate. So I don't believe in the healing crisis, crying jags, none of this stuff. We adapt, we change, we grow at rates that we can assimilate. So I'd like to thank you for your attention. I'm very happy that you have stayed with me through all of this. There's so much more to learn, and I invite you to watch other interviews on the network, and have a great day. Bye-bye.